Besides the physical and emotional trauma that comes from losing a baby, often losing a fallopian tube and having a D&C, the single biggest thing I often see with women that had an ectopic pregnancy is this huge question of why? Why did I have an ectopic pregnancy? So I have listed 7 major factors that I see in women's cases that contribute to the risk of having an ectopic pregnancy. And some of these you may have heard about, but I'm 100% sure a couple will be a surprise. Hello lovelies, and welcome to another one of my videos in which we'll be focusing on 7 major factors that contribute to the risk of having an ectopic pregnancy. Because let's face it, losing a baby is awful, no matter how far you were in your pregnancy or even after your pregnancy. But if on top of that, your body experiences so much physical trauma because of a D&C or because you may have lost a fallopian tube, that really leaves you wondering as well, what does my future look like? Will I be able to conceive again? Will I be able to have a baby at all? Well, I did a video on that a little while back, and make sure to check that out. I will link it up here and in the description below. But in this video, we'll be focusing on the question you probably have, and that is, why did I have an ectopic pregnancy? And just keep in mind that when you're watching this video and I'm talking through these factors, it doesn't mean that one of these things caused your ectopic pregnancy. It's usually multifactorial, but I want you to know what these factors are, because when we know about them, we can do something about it and we can reduce our chances of having another ectopic pregnancy in the future. Because let's face it, this is one of your biggest fears right now, isn't it? So I have also put together a video that is all about how you can prevent having an ectopic pregnancy or another ectopic pregnancy. And that video is coming out next week because I didn't want you to have to wait too long for that one. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do, and hit the notification bell so that you're notified when that video goes up. Also, another little side note is that ectopic pregnancies mean that an embryo is developing outside the safety of the uterus, which can, in theory and in practice as well, also happen in the cervix, in the ovaries, or even outside of the uterus in the abdominal cavity. But the majority of ectopic pregnancies actually happen in the fallopian tubes, and that is also what this video is focused on. So the first factor I see, and this is a not so common one, and that is daughters and even granddaughters of women that have used DES in the past. So DES was prescribed from the 50s until the 70s and into the 70s to women that had a history of miscarriages or were at risk of having a miscarriage. Unfortunately, as a result, a lot of the baby girls that were born with issues with their reproductive systems. And as a result, they are more at risk of having an ectopic pregnancy. The girls, the daughters of these women that were born are now in their 40s to 70s. So this definitely doesn't apply to all of you, because not all of you are 40 and above, but some of you are. So definitely keep this in mind if you've struggled with an ectopic pregnancy, and see if you can find out if your mom or even your grandmother had this medication in the past. Now, I don't think that the ladies between your 20s and 40s are completely off the hook, because some of you will be granddaughters of women that have used DES in the past. Often the daughters of these DES women that have scans, it will be very obvious in the reproductive system. But I do wonder what the effect is of the granddaughters that have been born. So definitely keep that in mind. To know if there's any malformation to your fallopian tube, you can have an HSG done, and then they can check what your fallopian tubes look like. If there weren't any obvious malformations, you may want to consider doing a homeopathic detox of the birth control, because DES is also part of that homeopathic detox, and that protocol is available on my website, but you've heard me say this before. The second reason for ectopic pregnancies is buildup of mucus in fallopian tubes, and this is something that you may have come across online already. Now, you may be wondering what causes mucus buildup, and these could be several factors. It could be that you have currently an STD, or you had one in the past that wasn't treated or wasn't treated well, and that causes an inflammatory state in your reproductive system, and that can cause mucus buildup also in fallopian tubes. Also, just generally pelvic inflammatory disease that could be due to an untreated STD, but it can also have developed due to other reasons that will cause mucus buildup as well. And then last but not least, candida. Candida doesn't necessarily always cause mucus buildup. It is usually in the more severe cases. But if you struggle with thrush a lot, that can definitely cause mucus buildup in your fallopian tubes. Not only that though, it can generally lower your fertility because candida affects the cervical mucus around your cervix, making it difficult for sperm to swim through, and it also doesn't nourish the sperm so it can survive longer to swim up to the egg, and it can even kill sperm. Number 3 is having used fertility drugs or progesterone-only birth control, because these synthetic hormones affect the ability of fallopian tubes to contract properly to move an embryo down. I have got an article about how fertility drugs can affect your fertility long term. I will make sure to link that in the description below as well so you can go and check that out. Number 4 is scarring, and you may have heard this already because this is probably the biggest reason I see for ectopic pregnancies in my clinic. The fallopian tubes are so tiny and so delicate that even any minor scarring can prevent an embryo from coming down properly. Scarring can be the result of several things. I mentioned the pelvic inflammatory disease and also STDs earlier because of mucus buildup, but if an inflammation is going on for a longer period of time, it will irritate the tissue so much that scarring starts to develop. Another more obvious reason for scarring in your fallopian tubes could be due to any type of surgery. So that could be any kind of surgery. It doesn't necessarily have to have been on your fallopian tubes or ovaries or uterus. It could be any kind of surgery you've had. It could also be due to a C-section. It could also be due to a past ectopic pregnancy, of course, or because you've had an abortion. And another reason for scarring could be endometriosis. I'll talk a little bit more about endometriosis later on in this video. Now, you may feel like scarring is something you can't do anything about. Well, I've got good news. There are definitely homeopathic remedies that you can use for this. And if you want to know about these, definitely tune into next week's video because I will tell you about them then. Number 5 is smoking. And by now we all know that smoking is a really bad idea when we're trying to conceive or when we're pregnant. But it's especially a bad idea when we're at risk of having an ectopic pregnancy, because nicotine, that addicting stuff that is in the tobacco, contracts the fallopian tube so much that the fallopian tubes become really narrow, and that makes it difficult for an embryo to travel down. Number 6 is endometriosis. I touched on it a little bit when we talked about scarring, but in case you're not sure what endometriosis is tissue of the uterine lining, that builds up and that goes down when we have our flow. Those cells can travel outside of the uterus, and they can travel to the outer membrane of the uterus, but also to the ovaries, but also into the fallopian tubes. And under the influence of hormones throughout your cycle, that endometrial tissue will grow. You can imagine that this is really painful because any spot outside of your uterus is not made for that lining. So any growth of those cells, you're definitely going to notice. And when you have endometriosis, you will most likely know because you are quite a bit in pain. Obviously, the problem when it comes to the risk of ectopic pregnancies is that if those cells go into the fallopian tubes, then again, that makes it difficult for an embryo to travel down. I find that a big reason for endometriosis is often estrogen dominance, and I've got a couple of videos on estrogen dominance, so I will also link those in up here and down below. And hand in hand with estrogen dominance goes the lack of progesterone, so definitely also check out that video. Number 7 is progesterone deficiency. We just talked about the endometriosis and how it's related often to estrogen dominance and how progesterone deficiency often is part of that picture as well, but unfortunately, progesterone deficiency in itself also puts you more at risk of an ectopic pregnancy because adequate levels of progesterone are needed for the PEG cells in the fallopian tubes, which produce the fallopian tube fluid, which also helps the embryo to swim down. As I said, I'm not going to leave you hanging just with the reasons for an ectopic pregnancy. We want to talk about solutions. So make sure to click on the video on your screen right now if it's already been released, and otherwise subscribe. The max you'll have to wait is a week. And in the meantime, see you in the next video. Bye!